Elephant cries over ashes. What the rangers discover next will break you. Amboseli Reserve, early morning. The soil was dry but recently disturbed, blackened in a circle no wider than a small waterhole. In the center, bits of wood, ash, and something else, lighter, finer, clung to the wind. A female elephant stood at the edge, not moving. Her ears hung slack against her sides. Her trunk rested lightly against the ground, the tip tracing slow, senseless arcs through the dust. Behind her, 3 rangers paused in silence, keeping a distance. She had been here since before dawn. Dowdy was the first to step forward. His boots pressed into the soft earth beside the burn. He crouched low, studying the pattern of heat-scarred stones and scattered ivory-white chips that did not belong. The fire hadn't been recent, but it hadn't been old either. A few tufts of grass were still curled from heat exposure. He didn't speak. No one did. The elephant turned her head slightly, just enough to see him. Then she let out a low, guttural sound. One long breath pushed through her throat. It wasn't a trumpet. It was something heavier. She didn't step away. She didn't charge. She just stood. The burn pit wasn't deep, maybe 2 feet at its center. The edges were crumbling. Dowdy scanned for animal prints, but the surrounding dust had been disturbed again and again. Her movements, it seemed, pacing, then pausing, returning to the center. Her body was clean except for the bottom of her front legs, coated with soot. She had touched it, possibly tried to dig. The sound she made lingered longer in the air than expected. The other rangers stood back, watching her ribs expand. Her tail twitch without rhythm. Nearby, a small herd grazed near a line of brush, but none approached. She had separated herself. Rangers had seen mourning before. Elephants lingered over bodies, guarded the dead, sometimes even carried bones. But this was different. There was nobody there. Just heat-scored ash and traces of something that had once lived. Dowdy walked the perimeter. To the north, the grass was undisturbed. To the south, faint indentations, round, shallow, marked where something had knelt or collapsed. Near the edge, a drag line of something heavier. He followed it 5 meters before it faded into flattened scrub. A carcass had been burned here. Or buried. The remains were not fresh, but something in the elephant's stillness suggested a grief that hadn't dulled. The sun was climbing. Wind picked through the tree line, scattering black flakes across the dust. The elephant shifted slightly, just 1 front foot, and curled her trunk inward. Her head lowered. Then she released another breath. Sharper this time, almost a groan. Dowdy stepped back. "If she's guarding," one ranger murmured, "then something was hers." Dowdy nodded once. It was too early to guess more. But something had happened here, something unnatural. The ash pile wasn't made by lightning. It was deliberate. The burn was too even, the pit too shallow. If she had lost a calf, where was the body? If she hadn't, why had she chosen this spot? They wouldn't move her. Not now. If they approached again, she might turn aggressive. But she hadn't yet. She had made a choice to stay here, over the fire-blackened earth, over whatever had been taken from her. The wind shifted again. Ash swirled at the edge of Dowdy's boots. In the distance, the herd was beginning to move, slowly grazing westward. But she remained still, head lowered, trunk coiled against her chest. There was nothing left in the pit. And still she stayed. Nothing was certain yet, but one thing was clear. If she stayed much longer, she would stop eating. And if she stopped eating, she would die. The wind had calmed by mid-morning, but the scorched earth still breathed warmth. Dowdy returned alone with a short-handled brush and gloves, walking wide around the elephant who still hadn't moved. Her body now faced east, angled just enough to keep one eye on the burn pit, one ear turned back toward the ranger's distant camp. She had eaten nothing, not even a single leaf from the branches behind her. Dowdy knelt again at the edge of the blackened ground. Careful not to step where she had stood. The soil gave slightly beneath his fingers. Not wet, just loose. Fine ash clung to the ridges of his gloves. When he pressed down, the surface cracked like old skin. Slowly, gently, he cleared a patch near the center, brushing in soft strokes no wider than his palm. Each motion uncovered more of the same, darkened soil, carbon dust, old plant matter. Then something pale. It was no bigger than a river stone, but it didn't crumble. Doughty paused, cleared a little more. Another piece surfaced, curved like a crescent moon. Then another. He stopped moving. Behind him, the elephant shifted. Her foot lifted and dropped again. She made no sound. A second ranger, Joseph, approached slowly, keeping behind the line Doughty had marked with a stone earlier that morning. Doughty motioned with his hand for silence, then pointed to the exposed fragments. Joseph crouched just enough to see the glint of sun on smooth bone. His breath caught. It wasn't an adult. The curve of the socket, the fine taper of the ridge. The bones were too light, too small, not from scavengers, not from drought-starved carcasses. Doughty swept a wider arc, revealing the edge of what looked like a rib, thin as his finger, hollowed clean by fire. He leaned back on his heels, then stood. "She's guarding a calf," Joseph said quietly. "Or what's left." Doughty didn't respond. He looked toward the elephant who was watching them now. Her head low. Her eyes are steady. The silence stretched between them. Her feet hadn't moved, but the dust beneath her was etched with the same crescent tracks, left by long hours of standing, stepping forward, stepping back. Doughty removed his gloves and took 3 careful steps back. Then 5 more. The elephant didn't charge. She didn't trumpet. But she breathed out again, loud and trembling. It wasn't grief alone. It was knowing. She had stayed because something of hers remained, even if it no longer lived. There was no way to know how the calf died, no fresh wounds, no visible signs of poaching or infection. But someone had burned the body. That much was clear. Elephants don't set fires. Someone had made a pit, placed the body inside and set it alight, possibly to hide it, possibly thinking it was mercy or necessity. But she had found it. Now she wouldn't leave. Doughty knew the pattern. He had seen cows stop eating for weeks after losing young. He had seen them return to the same site again and again, long after bones had vanished. But this was different. The body had not been left to return to dust. It had been altered, destroyed. She had come to reclaim something that no longer had a form. If they moved closer again, she might stop them. If they tried to remove the bones, she might attack. If they left her here, she might starve. Joseph glanced toward Doughty. "What do we do?" Doughty didn't answer yet. He looked once more at the elephant, then at the small scorched fragments half buried in black earth. "If she stays too long," he said softly, "she dies too." By the 3rd day, the ash had begun to harden beneath the sun, curling at the edges into pale crusts. But the elephant had not moved more than a few meters. She stood through the heat and wind, her weight shifting subtly from foot to foot. Only once each night did she walk a slow, wide circle into the grass beyond the clearing, then return before dawn, as if confirming the world hadn't changed without her. Rangers kept their distance. A quiet schedule had formed. Shifts of silent observation, no engines, no drones, no notes taken nearby. Doughty remained the anchor. He slept in a canvas cot beneath a tree line 60 meters from the burn. He ate in silence and drank little. In the quiet hours before sunrise, he watched her shape outlined in low fog. The rest of the herd had moved on days ago. She had not followed. Her eyes stayed open longer than normal, unblinking through dust storms, scanning with a kind of vacant steadiness. Occasionally, her trunk would drift down, sweep over the hardened black circle, and lift nothing. The soot had cooled. The bones were buried again beneath wind-blown grit. Still, She traced the same places. No feeding, no calls, no response to nearby movement. On the fourth night, a hyena crossed the far edge of the field. She did not flinch. Her ribs had begun to show through her side, not yet dangerous, but heading there. Elephants could fast for days, even a week in mourning. But something about her posture felt different now. It wasn't grief that made her still. It was something unfinished. Joseph noted the drag marks again behind the pit, revisiting the trail that had nearly vanished. The pattern was faint, but not random. Doughty traced the curve in the soil himself, then followed it another 6 meters into the acacia. The foliage thickened briefly, then broke into open scrubland. The wind here blew from a different direction. Something in his chest pulled. When he returned, the elephant had shifted. Her trunk was pressed fully to the earth now, coiled beneath her as if listening. She had not cried again. But once, when a breeze lifted ash into the air, her ears quivered. "She's not only mourning," Doughty said aloud that evening, seated beneath the makuti shelter with his back to the fading sun. "She's waiting for something." Joseph looked over from his post. "A calf?" Doughty didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because it was the only thing that made sense, and even that didn't explain everything. If a calf had been burned here, the remains were partial, and if this cow had twins, an extreme rarity, then where was the second? The team kept records. They checked movement logs, scanned nearby herds, and looked for recent sightings of orphan calves. Nothing matched, but still. The elephant returned each dusk to that same black circle. The ash no longer marked a fire, it marked her memory. And still, she would not leave. At first light, the dust lay quiet, undisturbed except where the elephant had circled again during the night. Her prints formed a wide ring around the ash, then returned inward, always ending at the same point. The pit. Doughty rose early and stepped beyond the marked perimeter, not toward her, but south, where the drag marks had faded 2 days earlier. The earth here was coarse, flecked with broken seed pods and wind-scattered thorns. But farther out, just past a crooked thorn bush, something broke the pattern. Near the edge of a shallow incline, he spotted it. A partial crescent no wider than a man's hand. The indentation was faint, almost missed in the morning glare, but the shape was familiar. He crouched, brushing loose debris aside. A second print sat beside it. Smaller, lighter, elephant, but not an adult, and not old. Less than 48 hours by the feel of it. He followed slowly, eyes on the ground. The trail was scattered, hesitant, each step irregular in distance and depth. 2 more impressions cut into the slope near a patch of soft reed grass, the left one deeper than the right. A limp. Not severe, but distinct. Then the prints turned abruptly, veering east toward the brush where the sun had not yet reached. Behind him, the sound of shifting earth broke his focus. Doughty turned. The elephant had moved. She had taken 2 steps from the pit. Her body still faced forward, but her trunk was lifted slightly, suspended in the air like a branch caught in a pause between winds. She didn't cry. She didn't charge. She only watched. The breeze drifted eastward, toward where he now stood. Doughty turned back. The trail ahead vanished into dry scrub. A stream bed ran parallel just beyond, bone dry except for a cluster of black mud crusted near the base. He stepped once more, knees low. Nothing. The tracks stopped cold beneath a fallen branch. No prints in the stream bed, no sign of descent, a disappearance. He stood still, scanning the brush, listening. Only insects and the rasp of early wind. But something had passed through here. Something that moved on smaller feet, left no vocal trace and favored one side. He walked the edge of the brush one last time, marking the angle. When he returned to the clearing, the elephant had lowered her trunk, but her body remained slightly turned now, just enough that her left side faced the direction of the brush. A subtle shift, but it had not happened by accident. If something small made it out, Joseph said, kneeling by the prints later, it didn't stay. Doughty nodded. It didn't die either. Not here. The implications were plain. The burned calf in the pit was not alone, and if the survivor had escaped before the fire, limping, afraid, possibly injured, it could still be alive, somewhere nearby. But without a trail, without a cry, and with the elephant refusing to move, they could only wait. The female shifted again before sunset. One slow arc of her trunk across the dust. Then she exhaled long and low. She was not finished with this place, because something of hers still lived. Just after dawn, a sound broke the stillness. It wasn't loud, not panicking, just a soft, cracked trumpet, short and low, like air pushed through bruised lungs. It came from the southeast, past the gully that cut behind the brush where the tracks had ended 2 days before. Doughty was already awake, standing by the edge of the clearing, water flask in hand. He turned toward the sound before the wind could carry it away. The elephant raised her head. He didn't speak to the others. He just moved. Across the field, past the drag line, down the incline where the earth dried into silt and roots tangled above the soil. He stepped carefully, placing each boot in silence, listening for anything. Breath, rustle, snap. At the mouth of the gully, the light hadn't reached yet. It stayed shaded, blue and gray, damp from some unseen spring. Then another cry. It came from deeper inside. Doughty followed. Halfway down, near a bend in the rocks, the brush parted. There, barely visible behind the reeds, a shape moved. Low to the ground, thin, covered in streaks of mud that had dried stiff across the ribs. The ears twitched, but only one rose fully. The other hung jagged at the edge, torn and charred. A calf, alive. He was small, older than a newborn, but younger than weaned. His back left leg bore weight unevenly, and when he turned his head, Doughty saw the side of his flank, darkened and bare where skin had burned away, edges of old blisters flaking in the heat. But his eyes were open, wide, alert. He had heard Doughty's steps, and now he stopped moving entirely. Doughty crouched low, hands open, voice low. "You don't have to come, just stay." The calf didn't approach. He didn't cry again, but his trunk moved toward the ground, lightly brushing reeds aside. Then, in one sharp movement, he took a step backward, deeper into the undergrowth. Hooves scraping soft stone. Doughty didn't follow. The calf disappeared behind tall grass and fell still. He waited. Minutes passed. Birds returned to the trees above. Wind settled over the gully again. Doughty scanned the path behind him, marked the bend in his mind, then rose and walked slowly back the way he came. When he reached the clearing, the elephant was standing near the edge. Not at the pit. Closer, facing southeast. She hadn't trumpeted, but her ears were raised now, forward, as if listening through the dust. Doughty approached slowly, stopping 10 meters from her side. "There's another," he said aloud. She didn't react, but she didn't turn away either. He knew the burn marks on the calf weren't fresh. He knew the tear in the ear was older, a wound from fire, but not one that would kill. The limp was manageable. The silence, though, the way the calf had gone quiet as soon as he was seen, that told more than injuries ever could. He'd survived something he shouldn't have. Alone, without guidance, without touch. The elephant lifted her trunk once, briefly, then let it fall. They couldn't bring her to him. Not yet, but the calf was alive. That was now certain. And if they moved too fast, he'd run again. And if he ran again, he might not return. By mid-morning, the wind had shifted again, pushing the scent of warm brush back toward the clearing. The elephant remained near the southeast edge, her gaze fixed beyond the low trees. Her posture had changed. Still, but no longer bound to the ash. She had taken 5 slow steps since dawn, all of them toward the gully. Doughty met with Joseph and the others beneath the acacia shelter. No one raised their voice. No one questioned what the cry had meant. Doughty simply pointed once across the ridgeline. "He's alive," he said. The left flank burned, limping, but upright. Joseph looked down. Then who was in the fire? Doughty didn't answer. But they all knew. The pit held only fragments, too small to be full-grown, too few to be complete. And now it made sense. The mother had returned to the place where part of her had died, but not all of it. She'd been circling not in mourning, but in confusion, grieving the wrong silence. Doughty returned alone to the gully that afternoon. The sun had begun to dip, casting slanted shadows through the reeds. He found the bend again, the place where the calf had vanished. He sat low in the grass, the dust from his boots settling into dry soil. He didn't speak at first. Just wait. Then, softly, no louder than breath, he said, "He's here." He didn't expect a reply, but from within the thick grass came the faintest rustle. Don't panic. Not approach. Just confirmation that the calf had heard him. This time, Doughty didn't rise. He stayed crouched, elbows on his knees, eyes level with the brush. In the distance, the elephant had moved again. She was standing now between the ash pit and the gully, facing the trees. Her ears moved with the breeze. Doughty looked down at the reed bed. The calf had made no sound, no attempt to approach, but he hadn't run either. If he escaped the fire, Joseph had said earlier, it means he knew to run. Doughty nodded. Or he was driven out. A fire set that close to calves would have forced instinct to take over. One may have bolted, the other, slower, hurt, caught in the flame. That would explain the wounds. The silence. The torn ear, already healing, and the mother's confusion. Returning to the last place, she saw both. The gully lay quiet. The air smelled of dust and bark. Doughty reached slowly into his pack and left a single strip of sugarcane near the edge of the grass, then stepped back, never turning his back, never rushing. The calf didn't come out. But Doughty saw the reeds part slightly once near the ground, then settle. At camp, the others had begun clearing a wider path between the clearing and the gully. Not to approach, just to prepare. If the calf emerged, it would be his choice. If the mother moved further east, the lines would converge. That night, the elephant slept standing, her body angled toward the trees. Doughty sat with his back to a stone, watching the dark shift around them. The calf had survived the fire. And now, they needed to make sure he survived the aftermath. By sunrise, the path between the clearing and the gully had been swept clear. Not forced, not cut, just cleared softly of sharp stones and brittle branches. It wasn't wide, just enough for one elephant to pass if she chose. Doughty stood at the head of it, 30 meters from the ash pit. The mother had not left her place all night, but she had turned, fully now, facing the gully, facing the space where something still lived. He didn't speak to her. No commands, no calls. He simply took a few steps forward, pausing every 10 paces, giving her time. His hands were empty, his posture low. When he reached the edge of the new trail, he waited. The elephant watched him, unmoving. Then, after a minute that felt longer, she stepped forward. 1 foot, then another. Her gait was slow, uncertain. The ground carried her weight in soft, uneven prints. When she reached the start of the trail, she paused again. Her ears twitched. Her trunk lifted slightly. And then she walked. Doughty moved ahead, but not far. He didn't lead her on. He only walked the same path, glancing back each time the dust rose behind her. She did not turn back toward the pit. She did not hesitate at the bend. When they reached the shaded edge of the gully, she stopped. The stream bed lay just below, cracked with lines of dry clay and strips of reed. At its edge, the air held a damp coolness, and somewhere beyond, hidden still in the brush, silence. Dowdy stepped aside. She stood alone now, staring into the trees, her trunk slowly rising, not straight, not high, but forward. She took one more step. Then she cried. It was not loud, but it was long, pulled from deep within her, mournful and raw. A trumpet not of fear, not of warning, but of need. It echoed once against the slope and died in the tall grass. Seconds passed. Then the brush moved. A rustle, a break, a pause, and then the calf. He stepped slowly from the reeds, one side still dark with old burns, ears uneven, leg dragging slightly, but he moved toward her, not away. His body, low, tentative, trunk curled near the ground. She held still, not charging, not reaching, just waiting. He crossed the last 5 meters in silence, then, gently, pressed his head against the front of her leg. She dropped her trunk to him at once, not lifting, not wrapping, only lowering it softly to his spine. It stayed there. No sound, no more movement. Just touch. Dowdy didn't move. No one else approached. The mother and calf stood at the edge of the stream bed as the light warmed the slope. She leaned slightly into him, and he leaned further into her. They did not shift again for hours. The wind passed around them, lifting dust but never touching their stillness. Behind them, the trail remained open, but they did not look back. The next morning, it broke without sound. The gully held its breath. Light crept slowly down the slope, touching the grass before it reached the trees. Dowdy sat where he had sat the day before, back straight, eyes fixed on the trail they had taken. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, as the sun warmed the reeds, 2 shapes stepped forward. The calf walked first, his right flank thin and rough with healed burns. His limp remained but had steadied. Behind him, close enough to brush his side, the mother followed. Her ears swayed gently, her trunk grazing the ground as she walked. They moved without hurry, heads low, each step deliberate together. There was no call, no glance back. Dowdy didn't move. He watched them pass beyond the gully's edge, across the clearing, past the line where fire had once eaten the soil clean. They did not pause, not even when they reached the far side of the old burn. She turned slightly, angling toward the west. The calf followed without hesitation. And then they were gone, down the slope, into the tall grass, where no tracks could follow. It was nearly midday when Dowdy returned to the place where it had all begun. The ash had settled fully now, pressed flat by days of wind and stillness. The ground where the pit once smoked held only a faint depression, ringed by pale streaks of soot and the heavy imprint of the mother's feet. Dozens of them, layered over and over in circles that told the story without sound. He crouched beside the pit and ran his hand across the surface. The earth was dry but not hard. Beneath the top layer, the soil still held warmth. Not from fire, but from what it had carried. Ash, memory, bone, silence. From the side pouch of his satchel he pulled out the sapling. It was small, less than a meter high, with narrow green leaves that trembled in the breeze. A wild fig taken from the southern fence boundary weeks ago. It had waited in shade, roots wrapped in cloth, meant for a ranger's marker stone that had never been built. Now it is in a different place. Dowdy dug by hand, slow and quiet, turning the soil in steady scoops. He didn't use the spade. It felt wrong to cut. When the hole was deep enough, he placed the sapling into it, pressing the roots gently into the ash. The cloth stayed buried. The leaves fluttered once as the base met the earth. He pressed the soil around it with both palms, careful not to compact too tightly. It had to breathe. Ash mixed with dirt, dirt with old grass, and the roots sank in with no resistance. Behind him, Joseph approached quietly. He didn't speak at first, just stood at a respectful distance, hands at his sides. After a while, he asked, Should we mark it? Doughty shook his head. No, he said. She'll remember. There was nothing more to say. The sun passed high overhead. The wind returned in slow waves, bending the tall grass at the clearing's edge. The fig tree stood alone now in the center of the old fire, its thin trunk already casting a sliver of shade. No plaque marked it, no boundary roped around it, just green rising where something had ended. Doughty remained seated beside it until the shadows lengthened. The air smelled of dry roots and stone. From where he sat he could see the faint curve of the mother's trail in the dust, a line of prints pressed deep at first, then lighter, then gone. Somewhere beyond the hills she was walking, not fast, but forward, and the calf walked with her. He had outlived fire. She had waded through silence, and together they had stepped back into the wild without need for anything else. Doughty stood once more before leaving. He didn't touch the tree. He didn't turn back. The wind carried through the leaves like breath, and in the center of the ash the sapling held.